At my sister's luxury wedding, she slapped me in front of 200 guests for refusing to give up my penthouse. I didn't flinch. A week earlier, her groom had sent me a handwritten letter admitting he admired me and feared marrying her. I read it aloud into the mic word for word. By morning, the video had gone viral. Her career collapsed. Their honeymoon was cancelled, but I didn't speak to ruin them. I just stopped staying silent. I'm Camille Hartley, and this is the story of how choosing myself made the world finally listen. The champagne glass trembled slightly in my hand as I watched my younger sister Savannah glide across the ballroom floor like she owned it. She probably felt like she did. Her Vera Wang gown shimmered under the chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton Manhattan, trailing behind her like a ribbon of white silk. 200 guests had gathered for her wedding, a carefully curated audience of socialites, business connections, and distant relatives who'd never missed a chance to remind me how much more charming, likable, and feminine Savannah was compared to me. I stood near one of the flower-draped cocktail tables, trying to keep my posture relaxed and my face unreadable. My black satin gown hugged my figure just enough to draw the occasional compliment, but I hadn't come here to compete. I was here because I was expected to be. Because I was the older sister. Because Savannah had asked me, no insisted that I be present. And because somewhere deep down I still wanted to believe that family meant something. Savannah's groom Derek stood beside her, tall and polished, smiling like a man who had just won a prize. I barely knew him, which wasn't surprising. They had been together for 8 months? Their whirlwind romance was the kind of thing tabloids loved, and Savannah thrived on that energy. She always had. Meanwhile, I'd spent the last 10 years grinding through law school, working 80-hour weeks, and building my own litigation firm from scratch. My life had never been built on whirlwind anything. "Camille, darling, you look lovely tonight." I turned to find my mother, Linda Hartley, approaching with her signature faux warmth. She wore navy silk tailored to perfection, her silver blonde hair swept up with meticulous care. Her compliments always landed like transactions. I knew that look in her eyes. She wanted something. "We need to have a little family chat." "Not now, Mom. It's Savannah's wedding." I forced a smile, hoping she'd take the hint. "Actually, no, now is the right time." My father Edward appeared beside her, the classic picture of old-school authority in a tuxedo that somehow made him look taller. His expression was tight-eyes, critical, and I knew that whatever they wanted was not going to be pleasant. "We've been talking about your living situation." I blinked. "My living situation?" I shifted the champagne glass to my other hand and crossed my arms loosely. "What about my living situation?" "Well, honey, Savannah and Derek are starting a family soon." Mom's voice had that saccharine edge that meant she was about to say something wildly inappropriate. "They'll need more space than Derek's apartment in Astoria." "They're not even pregnant," I said, keeping my tone even. "They will be soon." Savannah chimed in, suddenly appearing at Derek's side. Her green eyes sparkled, her smile tightly controlled. "We're going to start trying right after the honeymoon." "Congratulations," I said, forcing civility. "I'm sure you'll find a lovely place to raise your family." "We already have," she said, looking directly at me. "We want your penthouse." The words struck like ice water. "Excuse me, Camille," Dad began, already slipping into that calm, patronizing tone he reserved for negotiations that weren't really negotiations. "Think about it logically. You're single. You don't need that much space. Savannah and Derek need a real home for their future family. You don't even use all the bedrooms. You want me to give up my home?" "Not give up," Mom corrected. "Trade. You could take Derek's apartment. It's perfectly adequate for someone living alone." "A 600-square-foot one-bedroom in Astoria?" I raised an eyebrow. "You want me to trade my 3-bedroom penthouse on Central Park South for that?" "Don't be dramatic." Savannah rolled her eyes. "What do you even need all that space for? You don't even have a boyfriend." The sting was intentional. I felt it. And I saw Derek's jaw tighten ever so slightly. "I need that space because it's mine," I said quietly but firmly. "I bought that apartment. I earned it. And I'm not giving it up." "Camille Elizabeth Hartley," my mother snapped. "That is incredibly selfish." "Selfish?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "When I studied for the bar, you said I was antisocial. When I launched my firm and struggled, you said I was reckless. When I succeeded, you called it luck. And now that I have something you want suddenly, I'm part of this family again. You've always been part of this family, Dad said stiffly. Really? When was the last time you asked how my business was doing? If I was happy, you only remember me when Savannah needs something. Savannah stepped closer, her face flushed with rage. You know what your problem is, Camille. You've always been jealous of me. You can't stand that I'm getting married, that I'll have the family you'll never have. I'm not jealous of you, Savannah. I'm disappointed in you. Disappointed. She laughed harsh and sharp. I'm the one getting married. I'm the one giving Mom and Dad grandchildren. What have you done besides make money? I've built a life, I said, voice soft but steady. I've worked for everything I have. I've never asked anyone for anything. Well, now we're asking you for something, Dad said, stepping closer. Your sister needs that home more than you. It's time you thought about family for once. He's right, Mom added. Selfish children don't deserve a success. I blinked. Did you really just say that you've had every advantage, Camille? It's time to give something back. I worked 3 jobs through law school. I lived on ramen. I skipped birthdays, holidays, vacations. I never asked for a dime. Don't you dare act like this was handed to me. Savannah's eyes narrowed. You're not going to win this time, Camille. I'm finally getting what I deserve. What do you think you deserve? Savannah, everything, she said with a smile. The home. The attention. The life you hoarded for yourself. I deserve it all over my dead. The slap came out of nowhere. Her hand struck my cheek so hard my head jerked to the side. The sound echoed off the ballroom walls like a gunshot. A hush fell. Then the whispers began. People were laughing. Not all, but enough. Giggles, snorts, murmurs. Someone actually clapped. I felt my cheek burn. I did not cry. I looked at her, at my parents behind her. No one stepped forward. No one told her to apologize. Savannah smiled, triumphant. Maybe now you'll start acting like a real sister. The laughter grew louder. But I wasn't broken. Not this time, not even close. I stayed exactly where I was, the burn still fresh on my cheek, but my spine straight as a steel rod. The laughter swelled and ebbed like waves behind me, but I refused to flinch. I learned long ago that the real power in a room doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the person who refuses to be moved. My eyes drifted upward toward the golden chandeliers of the ballroom, but what I saw in my mind was not the ornate ceiling. It was a dorm room at Columbia University, the one I had barely afforded. I could still smell the mix of burnt coffee and takeout noodles, hear the late-night hum of my laptop as I typed case briefs while fighting off sleep. Back then, I worked the front desk at a student residence from midnight to 6 a.m., tutored high schoolers on weekends, and walked dogs before class. 3 jobs. No help. Not a dime from home. Mom called it character building. Dad said I was stubborn. Savannah. She laughed at the bags under my eyes when she came to visit, wearing a new cashmere sweater from Bloomingdale's, fresh from a semester off to find herself in Italy. She dropped out 6 months later, and no one said a word. The ballroom had quieted some. A server passed near me with a tray of champagne flutes and paused, unsure of whether to offer me one. I took a glass silently, not out of thirst but out of something to occupy my hands. In 2018, when I finally left Kaufman and Reese to open my own firm, I sent my parents a bottle of champagne and a card. I didn't expect a celebration, just maybe a phone call. What I got instead was a text from Mom, asking if I could lend Savannah $30,000 to help her with a branding startup she couldn't explain. Dad said I was being selfish when I asked for more information. I never saw the money again. The startup failed in 4 months. I sipped the champagne, now bitter on my tongue, and remembered the night in 2020 when Savannah got into legal trouble. A client claimed her influencer business had misused funds, and she panicked. She called me crying. I was in the middle of closing a high-profile corporate settlement but dropped everything to draft a response letter, loop in a contact from another firm, and wired over $5,000 to retain counsel for her. She never thanked me. In the weeks after, I waited for her to even acknowledge what I had done. Instead, I saw her post on Instagram about rising through the storm and finding inner strength. My name was never mentioned. My involvement was invisible by design. I'd been taught that love meant giving. I had just never realized that in my family love was only given when it was useful. Savannah had always been the golden child. When she changed majors 3 times, she was exploring her passions. When she broke off 2 engagements, she was learning to trust her heart. When I got promoted to partner at 32, Dad told me not to get cocky. My chest tightened, but not from sadness. From clarity. I wasn't just upset about tonight. I was awakening to the truth that this slap, this humiliation was just the latest in a long pattern of being silenced, dismissed, and exploited. Around me, people had resumed murmuring in small clusters. The laughter was gone now, replaced by something quieter and more dangerous. I caught eyes with someone across the room, a colleague from the New York Bar Association, who looked away quickly. Another guest I recognized from the City Council's Ethics Committee was whispering to his wife. The social fallout had already begun. Not just for Savannah, for me too. But I wouldn't run. I wouldn't hand them the satisfaction of watching me break. I wouldn't let them believe for a second that they had managed to embarrass me into silence. I took another sip of champagne, steadied my breath, and made a decision. This time I wasn't walking out. I wasn't going to disappear quietly like I had every time before. I had spent years swallowing hurt, packaging my pain into professionalism, pretending like it didn't matter when I was overlooked or dismissed. But not tonight. This time I would stay. I would look every one of them in the eye. And when the time was right, I would remind them who I was. I was Camille Hartley, and I was done being useful and invisible. I set the empty glass down gently on the edge of a table. My cheek still stung, but I welcomed the sensation. It reminded me I was still standing, still choosing. Not reacting. Not running. Just choosing differently. Behind me, Savannah's voice was bright again, artificial as ever, thanking people for coming, laughing with her bridesmaids. The moment was already being buried, swept under layers of tulle and makeup and pretense. But it wasn't over. Not for me. Not yet. A week before the wedding, I met Derek Lane at a small cafe in Tribeca, the kind with dim lighting, exposed brick, and discreet corners. He had reached out to me through a mutual contact, claiming he needed legal insight on a business issue. It wasn't unusual. People often sought free advice when they knew you were a lawyer, and I rarely indulged them. But Derek had been polite, persistent, and at the time he was about to marry my sister. I figured I owed it to Savannah, or maybe just to curiosity. He arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in a navy wool coat over a pressed white shirt, no tie. I watched him as he took the seat across from me, his hands steady but his eyes a bit restless. Derek was the kind of man people described as clean-cut, dependable, the one who always looked like he was moments away from closing a deal or receiving a promotion. But something was off that day. I noticed it immediately. "Thanks for meeting me, Camille. I know your time's valuable. What's this about, Derek?" "Your message was vague." He glanced around before lowering his voice. "I'm considering taking on a new partnership at Colwell Equity, but there's a snag. One of the investors has prior regulatory issues, and I wanted a legal perspective before I signed anything binding." I listened, asked questions, took mental notes. For 20 minutes, the conversation stayed strictly professional. I offered insight, outlined risk mitigation strategies, and gave him a few contacts to vet the investor more thoroughly. But as the coffee cooled between us, Derek's demeanor shifted. "Can I ask you something personal?" I hesitated. "That depends." "How did you do it?" I frowned. "Do what?" "Build all this. On your own." "I mean, Savannah told me a little, but I get the feeling there's more she doesn't say." I stared at him, unsure how to respond. Was this flattery, prying, or something else? "I worked hard," I said eventually. "Made sacrifices. I still do." He nodded slowly. "You don't chase approval, I've noticed that. It's rare." The silence between us stretched. I tapped my nail against the side of my mug, trying to decide what he was really after. "Is there something you're trying to tell me, Derek?" He looked away, then back at me with a guarded expression. "I'm not sure this wedding is happening for the right reasons." My breath caught, but I said nothing. "Savannah is." Impulsive, he continued. She gets these big ideas, paints beautiful pictures of what life will be, but sometimes I wonder if she believes them herself. You think she's lying? Not lying exactly. Just bending reality until it fits what she wants. And you? Are you bending with her? He didn't answer. I left that meeting more uneasy than when I'd arrived. I told myself to forget it, that he was probably just nervous venting, doing what men do when commitment looms too close. But later that night, a courier showed up at my building with a hand-delivered envelope. No return address. Inside was a letter. 3 handwritten pages on cream-colored stationery with slight smudges on the corners, like someone had handled them with sweaty palms. Camille, I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe you'll never read it. But I need to say this somewhere. You are everything Savannah says she is but isn't. You are measured, composed, driven in a way that doesn't demand attention but earns it anyway. I admire you. I'm intimidated by you. And I'm ashamed that I didn't get to know you sooner. There's a part of me that wonders what might have happened if timing had been different. If we had met before all of this. If I had seen you first. If I had chosen differently. I care about Savannah. I do. But I worry I'm walking into something that won't last. And I needed to tell someone who might understand. Not to change anything. Just to be honest for once. I won't bring this up again. But you deserve to know. Derek, I had read the letter once. Then again. Then a third time. Each time it felt like a weight being added to a scale I hadn't realized was tipping. I never responded. Never told Savannah. Never showed it to anyone. I folded it back into its envelope, slid it inside the drawer of my nightstand, and tried to forget it existed. But of course I didn't forget. You don't forget when the man marrying your sister confesses that he wishes he'd met you first. You don't forget when he sees through the same illusions you've been enduring for a lifetime. Now, standing in the aftermath of that slap with 200 eyes still trailing whispers around the ballroom, I thought of that letter again. I hadn't planned to use it. I hadn't planned for any of this. But plans didn't matter anymore. I wasn't here to expose anyone. But if tonight had proven anything, it was that protecting others at the expense of myself had only ever led to pain. And I was tired of being hurt quietly. I stepped through the tall glass doors and out onto the balcony, away from the clatter of silverware and fake laughter that still echoed inside the ballroom. The air was sharp with the scent of early spring rain and something floral from the massive arrangements along the railings. Below, the traffic on Central Park South moved steadily, unaware of the war unfolding 30 floors above. I pulled the letter from my clutch. The envelope was slightly bent now from being carried all evening. I didn't need to read it again. I knew every word. Still, I unfolded it slowly, holding it like something sacred or dangerous, or both. My fingers brushed the ink where Derek had pressed a little too hard. My name in his handwriting. That strange, delicate admiration that lived in each line. It wasn't a love letter, but it was enough to ruin things. I had never wanted to be anyone's secret, especially not his. But tonight wasn't about him or what he might have meant. It was about me. It was about what I had always allowed. What I had forgiven without a second thought. What I had buried in the name of family. The door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn. Camille. It was my father's voice. Heavy, measured. Followed by the soft click of heels. My mother. Of course. Your sister's very upset. I stayed silent, staring over the edge at the city. Edward placed a hand lightly on the balcony ledge beside me. Look, I know things got heated in there. But this doesn't have to turn into something bigger. You know how sisters are. There's always tension. Competition. It doesn't mean anything. My mother exhaled dramatically, the way she did when she believed she was the only adult in the room. I told you not to bring up that apartment tonight. This was supposed to be a happy day. But it's not too late to salvage it. You can be the bigger person. You usually are. I finally turned to face them. You want me to pretend it didn't happen. I'm saying let's not overreact. She slapped me. Mom, she was emotional. Weddings bring out the worst sometimes. It's just family tension. My mother stepped closer. You've always had trouble letting things go. You take everything so personally. But today is about your sister. It's her big day. Do you really want to ruin it over one moment? My laugh came low and dry. You think I ruined it? She's your sister, Camille. You know how important this is to her. To us. To you. My father folded his arms, jaw tightening. You're being unreasonable. She's apologized. No, she hasn't. Well, maybe she's waiting for the right time. Maybe she's embarrassed. She's not embarrassed. She's proud. Did you see her face? She hit me and then smiled. I turned away before they could answer. My eyes landed on Derek standing just inside the ballroom doors. He hadn't come out. Hadn't tried to stop the conversation. He just stood there, one hand in his pocket, the other clutching a drink, watching me like he couldn't decide if he was supposed to intervene or disappear. We've all made mistakes, my father said, voice softening. But you're the older one. The more stable one. You've always been the calm one in the family, the responsible one. The convenient one. You're successful, Camille. That should be enough, but it never was, I said. Not for you, not for her. No matter what I did, it was never enough to earn respect. Only to earn more demands. Don't be dramatic. I gave him a long, steady look. Don't use that word. There was a silence. My mother shifted uncomfortably. I know you think you've been mistreated, but you're not perfect either. You can be cold, distant. You hold grudges. Maybe that's why you're alone. The words landed sharper than she intended. Her face twitched like she might take them back, but she didn't. I nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty, Camille number. It's fine. I finally get it. You didn't come here to fix anything. You came here to make sure I didn't disrupt the performance. I turned toward the glass doors. My reflection stared back at me, faint against the ballroom's golden light. My cheek was still red. My lipstick faded, my hair slightly undone. But my eyes were clear. And for the first time in a long time, I saw a version of myself that wasn't trying to hold it all in. I opened the door and stepped inside. Derek shifted when I approached. He didn't speak. I walked past him. Back into the lights. The chatter. The orchestra swelling with a soft jazz number no one was really listening to. I walked past Savannah's bridesmaids who stopped mid-whisper. Past my aunt from Connecticut who avoided eye contact. Past the wedding planner trying to reset the mood with dessert trays. I walked back into the same room where I had been humiliated. And I walked in differently. Because this time I wasn't going to stay silent. I moved through the ballroom like I was gliding underwater, barely feeling the floor beneath my heels. The chatter softened as people noticed me again, not with laughter this time, but with tension. Faces shifted. Forks paused midair. The string quartet faltered slightly before resuming their quiet tune. I stopped in the center of the room next to the head table where Savannah was holding court with her bridesmaids. Her hand was wrapped around a glass of champagne and her mouth formed some smug sentence I didn't care to hear. When she saw me standing there, she blinked like she wasn't sure if I was real. I turned to the nearest server and gently touched her elbow. May I borrow the microphone for a moment? She hesitated, looking toward the band. Please. I'll be quick. After a brief exchange with the lead violinist, she handed me the mic. The moment it passed into my hands, the buzz of the room dropped into quiet disbelief. I waited. Let the silence settle around me. Then I raised my chin and spoke clearly into the mic. I'm not here to make a scene. I'm not here to ask for an apology. I don't need anyone to defend me. But I do need the truth to be heard. Somewhere behind me a fork clinked against a plate. Across the room I saw Derek stiffen. Savannah scoffed under her breath, but I didn't look at her. A week ago, Derek asked to meet with me. He said he had questions about a business deal. I agreed. After that meeting, he sent me a letter. I never responded. But now I think I should have. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the envelope. My hands were steady. I unfolded the letter slowly, the creases smooth from the number of times I had held it. I read it aloud. Camille, I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe you'll never read it. But I need to say this somewhere. You are everything Savannah says she is, but isn't. You are measured, composed, driven in a way that doesn't demand attention but earns it anyway. I admire you. I'm intimidated by you. And I'm ashamed that I didn't get to know you sooner. There's a part of me that wonders what might have happened if timing had been different. If we had met before all of this. If I had seen you first. If I had chosen differently. I care about Savannah. I do. But I worry I'm walking into something that won't last, and I needed to tell someone who might understand. Not to change anything. Just to be honest for once. I won't bring this up again. But you deserve to know. Derek, I didn't read the letter with anger. I didn't rush it. I let every word ring out into the quiet. The room didn't make a sound. When I reached the final lines, I paused. And he ended with this. If she ever hurts you again, tell me. The silence was absolute. Savannah's face had gone pale, her mouth slightly open. She looked like someone had yanked the ground out from under her, and she hadn't landed yet. Derek stood frozen, his glass untouched. My mother had sunk into her chair, her hands pressed flat on her knees as though trying to steady herself. I lowered the microphone. That's all. I handed it back to the server, who looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. No one moved. And then the whispers began again, but this time they carried a different tone. Not laughter, not mockery. Just stunned recognition. Heads turned toward Savannah now, not me. People whispered her name like it was suddenly attached to something shameful. Someone near the cake table murmured, "He wrote that to her." Before the wedding, I caught sight of a cousin frowning at her husband. One of the groomsmen shifted away from Derek. An aunt grabbed her clutch and quietly made her way toward the exit. Savannah took a single step toward me. Her voice was tight and brittle. "You kept that letter. How dare you?" I didn't respond. "You think this makes you look good? You're pathetic." I didn't flinch. Neither did anyone else. Derek looked like he was about to say something but thought better of it. He wiped his hand across his mouth and stared at the floor. My mother reached for her water glass but missed. It tipped and rolled off the table, crashing to the floor. No one moved to pick it up. That was when I knew the room had shifted. Not because I had humiliated anyone. I hadn't needed to. I had simply read a letter. A letter filled with uncomfortable truths. And the silence that followed was the sound of people realizing who Savannah really was. I turned without a word and walked away, leaving them all standing in the debris of their perfect little event. I didn't return to the ballroom. Instead, I took the elevator down to the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton. My clutch still clutched tight under one arm, the letter folded neatly inside. The concierge gave me a subtle nod as I walked past, like he had heard enough to understand this wasn't the time for questions. Outside, the Manhattan night air met me like a wave, cool and sharp. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, heels anchored on the stone as the city buzzed around me. A cab pulled up to the curb and I got in without checking the destination. My driver glanced at me in the mirror. "Rough night," I nodded once. "You want silence or music?" "Silence, please." He nodded back, respectful. We drove in quiet. When I got home, I kicked off my shoes by the door and peeled myself out of the black gown, the zipper catching slightly on the side. My penthouse was dim except for the lights of Central Park glittering through the wall of windows. I didn't bother turning anything on. I needed stillness. I needed to feel the space I had earned, a space no one would ever take from me again. I didn't look at my phone until after I had showered, dressed in a sweatshirt and leggings, and poured myself a glass of wine. When I finally checked, the screen was full. Calls, messages, alerts from social media apps I barely used. Mentions, tags, dozens of them. At first I thought it was just friends reacting to the slap. Maybe someone had posted about the family drama. But then I saw it. A video. 1 minute and 42 seconds. The caption read, "Sister gets slapped at wedding, calmly reads groom's letter in front of 200 guests." Absolute legend. My breath caught as I hit play. There I was holding the microphone, voice calm and steady. The camera caught Savannah's face, caught Derek's expression, caught every stunned reaction as I read the letter. It ended on the silence. The kind of silence people don't forget. Within hours, it had been reposted across TikTok, Instagram, even Twitter. Someone on Reddit had already started a thread titled "Bridal Slapgate, the letter heard round Manhattan." The next morning, Janelle called before 7. "Camille, I know it's early, but you need to see what's happening." She was breathless. "Everything okay?" I sat on the edge of the bed still holding my phone. "Better than okay if you like chaos." BuzzFeed picked it up. So did Jezebel. There's an op-ed on Medium called "When Men Choose the Wrong Sister and Women Get Blamed for Owning Property." You're in it. Kind of a hero, actually. That was fast. There's more. Carolyn West just published a column called "When Women Are Called Selfish for Keeping What They Earned." She mentioned the Penthouse said the whole thing is a textbook case of gendered entitlement. I ran a hand through my hair, unsure if I was amused or horrified. "Did you give anyone a quote?" "Absolutely not. I told them we weren't commenting at this time." "Do you want to release a statement number?" "Let it breathe." Janelle exhaled into the phone. "Honestly, I think that's the smart move. The more you stay quiet, the more people are speaking for you. It's building on its own." By noon, the video had crossed 5 million views. I received an email from a legal podcast requesting an interview. Another from a nonprofit that supports women navigating financial abuse inside families. They wanted me to speak at their spring fundraiser. I declined everything. I didn't want a spotlight. I wanted silence. I wanted the noise to swirl around me without dragging me into its center. By the afternoon, the tone online had fully shifted. People weren't talking about how dramatic I was or whether I had deserved the slap. They were talking about Savannah. About how she had demanded property she didn't earn. About how she had hit her sister in public. About how her groom had sent a letter that revealed more than he realized. Lawyers I hadn't seen since Columbia messaged me to say they had my back. Colleagues forwarded screenshots of group texts where senior partners at firms I used to intern for were discussing the video. I even got a DM from Judge Vanessa Harding, who simply wrote, "We see you. Good for you." For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding my world together alone. I wasn't just a woman who had been slapped. I was a woman who had been silent long enough. And I hadn't said anything more than what was true. By Monday morning, the cracks had turned into full fractures. Savannah's firm, a boutique PR agency in Soho known more for image than ethics, placed her on immediate suspension. The official reason was pending review of professional conduct, but everyone knew it was about the video. No brand wanted to be associated with a woman who slapped her sister at a luxury wedding and was then exposed by a letter from her own groom. Her team had tried to do damage control over the weekend. Someone had edited together a clip of her crying at the reception, hoping to paint her as overwhelmed. The internet wasn't buying it. The footage of her slapping me had already been turned into reaction. GIFs, TikTok voiceovers, and memes with captions like "When you want her penthouse but forget she's a lawyer." Their honeymoon to Bali was postponed indefinitely. According to a tip in one of the bridal gossip forums, Derek's firm launched an internal review to assess whether any ethical violations had occurred, particularly regarding his personal judgment. No one had said the letter alone violated policy. But in the corporate finance world, perception was often more damaging than fact. Meanwhile, my parents had gone unusually quiet. That changed on Wednesday afternoon when my doorman called up from the lobby. "Miss Hartley, your mother is here. She says it's urgent." I considered pretending not to be home. But I knew it would only delay the inevitable. "Send her up." I opened the door to find Linda Hartley standing there in pearls and panic. She wore a pale beige trench coat and a silk scarf knotted tightly at her neck as if trying to hold herself together with accessories. "Camille." She rushed forward, arms slightly out, but I didn't move. "Please come in." She stepped inside like it pained her, her eyes scanning the apartment the way people do when they're about to ask you to give something up. "It's worse than we thought," she said, voice trembling. "The country club canceled our membership. Edward hasn't been invited to the community foundation dinner. People are talking. No one's returning my calls." She sat on the edge of the couch like she might fall off. "Your sister hasn't left the house in 3 days. She's barely eating. She's humiliated. That makes 2 of us." Her eyes snapped up. "Camille, please. This has gotten out of hand. You've made your point. But we need to put a stop to this. The family name is at stake." I folded my arms. I didn't start any of this. You're the one who read that letter. I didn't write it. You could have handled it privately. She slapped me in front of 200 people. Her face twisted, and for a second I thought she might cry. People are calling us abusive. They're saying we used you. That we forced you to give up your home. It's damaging, Camille. It's not just gossip anymore. It's reputational. She looked at me like that word meant everything. I sat down slowly across from her, letting the weight of the moment settle. I didn't ruin your reputation, Mom. I just stopped protecting it. Tears welled up in her eyes. Her hands clutched the hem of her coat. Please. Help us fix this. Release a statement. Say it was a misunderstanding. Say you and Savannah made up. We didn't. But people don't have to know that. I stared at her. For a brief second, I saw her not as my mother, but as a woman who had built her entire identity around the illusion of a perfect family. And now that illusion had cracked, and she had no idea who she was without it. I'm not going to lie to clean up a mess I didn't create. Camille, we're your family. Family doesn't scream at you in public. Family doesn't slap you when you say no. Family doesn't treat you like a resource to be managed. She broke then, shoulders shaking, mascara smudging slightly under her eyes. I just wanted things to go back to the way they were. They can't. You're punishing us. No, I'm protecting myself. For the first time in my life, she went quiet. I walked to the window, the same spot I stood so many nights thinking about who I had to be to survive that house, that legacy. I turned back to her, not with cruelty, but with certainty. I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped being silent about it. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Do you hate us? I don't. Then why are you doing this? Because I finally understand that loving you doesn't mean letting you hurt me. She stood slowly, her posture smaller than I'd ever seen it. If you change your mind, we could use your help. I nodded once, though it meant nothing. She left without another word, the door clicking softly behind her. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something new. The sound of a family beginning to collapse under the weight of the truths they'd buried for too long. 2 days after my mother left my apartment, a letter arrived in a pale gray envelope marked with the insignia of the New York State Supreme Court. It was hand-addressed in neat, deliberate script. For a moment, I thought it was a notice or a summons, though I hadn't done anything to warrant one. Then I saw the name on the back flap. Naomi Chen. Inside was a single page on thick linen paper. No courtroom language. No official title, just a note written in pen. Camille, I was at the wedding. I saw what happened. I wanted to speak up, but I hesitated. That's on me. What you did took extraordinary courage. Speaking hard truths in a room built on performance is not easy. You reminded all of us what integrity looks like when it's quiet but unwavering. I'm proud of you. Warmly, Naomi. I read it 3 times. It wasn't long, but it hit harder than any article or social media post. She had seen everything. And she hadn't stepped in. But she was saying now what mattered most. I folded the note carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed next to Derek's letter. Later that evening, as I was finishing up emails in my home office, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then something in my chest nudged me to answer. Camille Hartley. A familiar voice came through the line. Still so formal. It's Austin Myers, from Columbia, Austin. Oh wow. It's been a while, it has. But I saw the video. And the fallout. Listen, I'm not calling to dig, I'm calling to say. If you decide to take legal action, I'll stand next to you in court. You're still at Lexington Row. I'm lead counsel now. My calendar is yours if you want it. I mean it. I leaned back in my chair, the offer warming me more than the wine beside my laptop. Thank you, Austin. Really? But I'm not pressing charges, you sure? Yes. I'm not looking to punish them. I just needed them to know I'm not easy to break anymore. There was a pause. Then a low laugh. God, I missed you. I smiled, letting it linger. It's good to hear from you. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Not vindicated. Not victorious. Just seen. The next morning, I opened my inbox to a message from an organization I had heard about for years but never engaged with directly. The Women's Integrity Collective. Their subject line was simple. We'd be honored to have you. The email explained they were hosting their annual summit in Boston next month. They had seen the video. Read the commentary. Tracked how my silence and my strength had turned into a conversation across the country. They wanted me to speak. Not as a lawyer. Not as a victim. As a woman who had survived familial coercion and said no with grace and power. The topic they proposed: boundaries within bloodlines. I stared at the email for a long time, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to retreat, to step away from it all now that the storm was slowing. But another part of me knew this was the moment to choose visibility. Not for applause, for truth. I responded with a yes. The next few days passed with less noise. Fewer headlines. The internet moved on as it always does. But some things remained. Quiet messages from women in their 40s, 50s, even 70s who told me about their own sisters, their own parents, the sacrifices they were asked to make without thanks. My inbox filled with stories. Some were heartbreaking, others empowering. All of them familiar. One woman wrote, "I watched you stand there, and I thought that's what it looks like when you choose yourself." Another said, "I've never told anyone my family tried to take my house. Until now." They didn't want me to fix their pain, they just wanted to be seen in mine. And in all the noise, the silence of my family remained. No calls from Savannah. No texts from Derek. Not even a message from my father. But it didn't ache like I thought it would. Not anymore. Instead, I prepared for Boston. I opened a blank page on my laptop and began outlining what I would say. About being the strong one. About being told that silence was maturity, that boundaries were selfish, that love meant sacrifice, and how I had finally mercifully stopped believing it. I hadn't expected anything to come of it so quickly. But just 3 weeks after the wedding news broke that Derek Lane had officially filed for divorce from Savannah Hartley. The filing appeared quietly in the public court docket, but the media had grown skilled at monitoring high-profile names. Within hours, screenshots of the petition flooded the internet. The reason listed was simple yet damning: irreconcilable differences rooted in misrepresentation and undue pressure surrounding the marriage. In layman's terms, Derek had admitted he felt trapped. No joint statement was issued, no carefully filtered Instagram post asking for privacy. Just silence. And then, like a vanishing act, Savannah's wedding photos disappeared from her social media. The elaborate video montage she had paid an influencer to film never aired. Derek's profile went dark, his firm erasing any congratulatory mention of the wedding from their official newsletter. Savannah, I later heard, had moved back into my parents' estate in Westchester. Her lease on the high-rise apartment she once flaunted had ended, and with no job to support the image she had cultivated, she returned home with her luggage and the remnants of what was meant to be a new life. Her PR firm had made the decision a week after her initial suspension. Too many clients had expressed discomfort. One reportedly asked outright, "Is this the woman who slapped her sister for a penthouse?" The firm decided to quietly release her under the pretense of restructuring. My parents, once the center of their upscale social circle, faded just as quickly. The invitations stopped coming. No more wine tastings, no more charity brunches. Their country club canceled their annual spring membership. Linda stopped attending her bridge club. Edward turned down the speaking engagement he had been bragging about for months. I didn't learn these things because I sought them out. They came to me in whispers, emails from acquaintances, offhand mentions from former classmates or mutual colleagues. One of my clients, a board member at the Westchester Symphony, mentioned it casually during a contract review. "Your father didn't show up to the donor dinner last Friday," she said. I heard they pulled back his honorary title. There was no malice in her tone. Just observation. A recognition that something had shifted and everyone had noticed. Still, I didn't feel triumphant. There was no joy in watching people unravel even when they had spent years unraveling you. But there was clarity. And in that clarity, a kind of relief I hadn't known I was missing. For most of my life, I had been expected to protect the Hartley image. Smile when I was hurt, give when I was empty. Be the strong one, the composed one, the one who could take the hit and keep standing. Now no one expected anything from me. And it was strangely freeing. One afternoon, while reorganizing my bookshelves, I found the old family photo from my law school graduation. I had framed it years ago, before things turned. In it, Savannah stood beside me, her arm loose around my shoulders, her smile a little forced. My father's hand rested on my back, and my mother wore a pearl brooch and a grin sharp enough to cut glass. I took it out of the frame and placed it in a drawer. Some stories didn't need to be on display. That weekend, I ran into Mrs. Halberton, one of my parents' oldest friends, at a cafe near the park. She approached me slowly, unsure whether she should speak. "Camille," she said gently. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how everyone treated you. I saw the video. I read the articles. I always wondered why you kept your distance from family things, and now I understand. You were carrying more than anyone knew." I thanked her, unsure what else to say. "They're not doing well," she added almost as a whisper. "Your mother barely leaves the house. Your father, well, he seems more angry than anything." I didn't respond. It wasn't mine to fix. At night I sometimes lay awake, not with regret, but with the eerie stillness that follows after something seismic. The quiet that comes after you've told the truth and let it land where it may. I thought of Savannah alone in her childhood bedroom, stripped of the glamour and the titles and the followers. I imagined her scrolling through comments she couldn't delete, reading opinions she couldn't control. I wondered if she hated me, if she blamed me for all of it. And maybe she did. But the truth was, I didn't ruin her life. I just refused to protect a version of her that never existed. They weren't suffering because of my actions. They were suffering because for the first time the world had seen who they really were, and they didn't like the reflection. What I had done wasn't cruel. It was honest. And the difference mattered. In the mornings, I returned to my routine. I answered work emails, met with clients, reviewed contracts. My firm grew steadily, inquiries increasing every week. Some reached out explicitly because of the wedding incident, saying they wanted a lawyer with backbone. Others simply appreciated the calm professionalism I'd always led with. I didn't discuss my family. I didn't entertain interviews. I let the story fade naturally, allowing life to resume in the way I had always hoped it would, quietly, firmly, on my own terms. For the first time, no one questioned my silence. No one asked me to apologize for choosing peace. And I no longer felt the need to explain why. I spent the first Saturday of spring pulling every box from the second bedroom. For years, it had served as storage. Holiday decorations, I never used, law books I hadn't touched since the bar coats I didn't wear but couldn't let go. It was a space I avoided, like some part of me was saving it, waiting for something or someone that never came. That morning, I opened the blinds wide and let the sunlight hit the floor. I ordered a new desk, a tall bookshelf, and a cream-colored rug with a subtle geometric pattern. I called a local carpenter to install floating shelves. By evening, the room felt lighter, as if the dust itself had been holding its breath. This wasn't just an office, it was a declaration. The third bedroom, once mocked by Savannah as pointless for a woman without children, became a guest room. I found soft linens in warm colors and added a small welcome basket on the dresser, an idea borrowed from a Vermont inn I once stayed at during a deposition trip. The changes weren't about erasing the past, they were about claiming space. Fully. Finally. A week later, I hosted my first dinner in the apartment. Just 4 people. Janelle Austin, a friend from Columbia named Rachel, and my upstairs neighbor Clara, who had once knocked on my door with soup when she heard I'd had the flu. We opened a bottle of Cabernet, cooked together, laughed so hard, Janelle nearly dropped a serving spoon down the sink. No one asked about my family, no one tiptoed around the word wedding. It wasn't a celebration of surviving something, it was just life. Easy, full, mine. As everyone left, Clara hugged me at the door and whispered, "Thank you for letting us in. It's nice to see your lights on." The next morning, I walked downstairs to check my mail. Luis, the doorman who had known me since I moved in 6 years earlier, looked up from his desk with his usual warm eyes. "Miss Hartley, good morning." "Good morning, Luis." He tilted his head slightly, observing me. "You're smiling today. Not just polite smiling. The kind that reaches your eyes." Haven't seen that in a while, I blinked, touched by how clearly he'd seen through the years of armor. Maybe I finally have something to smile about. He nodded and handed me a package. Brown paper. No return address. Back upstairs, I opened it to find a handwritten note from one of the directors of the Women's Integrity Collective. Inside was a plaque carved with a quote I had shared during the summit. "You don't owe your peace to people who demand your silence." I placed it on the new office shelf. Later that day, I finalized the paperwork to contribute anonymously to a foundation supporting single women launching their own businesses. I used a trust name instead of mine. It wasn't about credit, it was about passing something forward. A small push for the woman who was one no away from giving up. The woman I once was. Each night as I walked through the apartment, I noticed how the space had started to feel different. Not just cleaner, clearer. The noise that used to echo in the back of my head, my mother's disapproval, my sister's mockery, my father's disappointment, it had grown quiet. One evening, I sat on the balcony with a blanket and a glass of ginger tea watching the sun dip behind the skyline. The city blinked to life beneath me. Central Park lay like a soft shadow stretching far and wide. I thought about the word family. It had always meant obligation, negotiation. Something you were born into and stuck with. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe family wasn't who named you. Maybe it was who didn't shrink you. Who didn't punish you for growing. Who walked beside you instead of pulling you backward. I wasn't alone. I had Janelle who handled my calendar like a queen and left little sticky notes on my desk with encouraging messages. I had Austin who sent articles and dad jokes in equal measure and who reminded me that people do change and sometimes they return better. I had Clara who watered my plants when I forgot and dropped by with lemon scones. I had Luis who had seen me in every version of myself and had quietly rooted for me through all of them. I had a city that knew my name and a penthouse that no longer felt like a fortress but a home. And for the first time in my life, I didn't just feel strong. I felt soft, safe seen. That was family. By choice. Not by blood. It happened on a Thursday evening 6 months after the wedding. I was attending a legal industry fundraiser at the Avery Club downtown, one of those networking events where everyone pretended to enjoy shrimp cocktails and made small talk about pending legislation. I had been invited as a guest speaker on a panel about women in corporate law. The room was bright with chandeliers and full of polished people in tailored suits. I wore navy with silver earrings, simple and firm. It felt like armor, but lighter. After the panel, I was standing near the bar talking with a former colleague when I saw her. Savannah. She had changed. Her once perfectly blown-out hair was pulled into a loose bun that didn't quite hold. She had lost weight, but not the kind that comes from wellness. Her eyes were rimmed with fatigue, her dress elegant but wrinkled like she had thrown it on without care. I froze for half a second, then straightened my posture. She hadn't seen me yet. But when she did, she hesitated. Then started walking toward me. I excused myself from the conversation and met her halfway, not because I owed her the convenience but because I didn't want an audience. We stopped near a quiet corner behind a row of tall potted palms. Her voice was barely audible. "Camille, Savannah." She looked down then back up. There was no spark in her eyes, only the kind of restless regret people carry when they can't undo the past. "You look good." I waited. Compliments were not currency here. She shifted her weight. "I've been meaning to reach out. I just didn't know how. You found a way." She nodded, eyes scanning the floor. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry. For everything. For what I did. For what I said. For how I made you feel." I watched her carefully. The words were right. The tone wasn't. She continued before I could respond. "It was just a lot. All the pressure. The wedding. Mom and Dad. Derek pulling away. I didn't know how to handle it and I snapped. There it was. Not apology. Just explanation. I listened. Let her speak. Let her fill the space with rationalizations. "The press made it worse," she added, voice tighter. "People online don't understand context. They twist everything. And Derek. He blindsided me. You know he was never ready." I stayed quiet. She paused, then softened her voice. "I just wish it hadn't happened that way. I wish we could go back and fix it. I miss you, Camille." I miss having a sister. I looked at her, really looked. Her dress hung off her frame. Her nails were chipped. Her foundation didn't quite cover the shadows under her eyes. But what struck me most was how familiar this moment was. Savannah in distress. Me standing in front of her. Her hoping I would step in and carry the weight of her ruin. I kept my voice calm. I believe you're sorry, Savannah. But not for what you did. You're sorry for what happened after. For how it spiraled. For the consequences. Her jaw tensed. That's not fair, it's true. You regret the fallout, not the strike. She blinked. I didn't mean to hit you that hard, but you meant to hit me. The silence between us stretched. I wasn't trying to ruin your life, she said quietly. And I wasn't trying to be your enemy. We stood there, two grown women in cocktail attire, sisters by name, strangers by reality. You said once that I didn't know what it meant to have a family, I said. But I do now. And it doesn't look like being slapped in front of 200 people while my parents watched. Her face tightened as if bracing for another blow, but I had none left to give. I'm not angry anymore, I told her. But I'm also not going back to pretending. That's not healing, that's denial. She nodded, slowly, lips pressed together. So that's it. She stepped back. Her hand twitched like she wanted to reach for me but thought better of it. Okay, well, I hope you're happy. I am. She looked at me once more. Then walked away, heels clicking too fast, her shoulders rising slightly as if she needed to leave before she shattered again. I didn't watch her go. I turned back to the bar and rejoined my conversation, letting her absence pass through me like a breeze. Not disruptive, just motion, just release. Some endings didn't need closure, just truth. And space. And the freedom to walk away. That night, I walked home instead of taking a car. The air was crisp, scented faintly with spring rain and street vendors packing up for the evening. My heels clicked softly on the pavement, a steady rhythm against the hum of the city. It was late enough that the streets had quieted but early enough that the skyline still pulsed with light. I passed couples holding hands, a man walking his dog, a group of college kids laughing too loud outside a diner. By the time I reached my building, the doorman had already stepped aside with a smile, no words needed. I nodded in return and stepped into the elevator, watching the city fall away as I ascended. When the doors opened, I was met with the stillness of my home. My sanctuary. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my clutch on the entry table, and poured myself a glass of water. Then I walked out to the balcony and let the wind meet me. It wasn't cold, not quite warm either, just clean. The view was breathtaking even after all these years. Central Park stretched out in front of me, dark and endless. The buildings sparkled around it like quiet sentinels. There was a stillness to it all that didn't feel empty, just at rest. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat down on the lounge chair I had moved out there last week, intending to finally enjoy the space. A small indulgence I had always postponed, waiting for the right moment. It turned out the right moment was simply when I decided to take it. My phone buzzed against the table. A text from Rachel. If you ever want to tell your story, Camille, I'll make sure it's told with honesty and dignity. You deserve that. No pressure, just here if you want it. I read the message twice, then turned the screen off and set the phone face down. Maybe one day I'd say yes, but tonight didn't belong to the world. It belonged to me. I looked up at the sky, soft and gray-blue, no stars visible through the city haze, but I knew they were there. Like all the things that mattered but weren't always seen. Peace, strength, boundaries, healing. I had spent so much of my life performing the role of the reliable one, the successful one, the one who could take it, who could be screamed at, leaned on, blamed, and still show up for Christmas dinner with wine and a gift no one would remember. I had always believed that love came with a price, that being part of a family meant tolerating hurt in silence, that you couldn't have love and truth at the same time. But now in this quiet space, I knew better. Love without respect isn't love. Family without kindness isn't family. And silence isn't strength when it means swallowing your dignity. They had called me selfish, dramatic, cold. But all I had ever done was ask for what I earned to be honored. My home, my peace, myself. And when they couldn't respect it, I walked away. Not in anger, not with vengeance, but with clarity. I didn't destroy my family. I simply stopped pretending that they had ever been one. And that distinction changed everything. From somewhere down below, a car horn blared, then faded. The hum of the city returned. My plants rustled in the breeze. The warmth of the blanket curled around me, a gentle weight grounding me in the present. Inside, my home glowed with low golden light. My office was freshly reorganized. The guest room still smelled faintly of lavender from when Rachel visited last week. The books on my shelf were ones I loved, not ones I kept to impress anyone. The art on the walls made me smile. The space looked nothing like my childhood home, which is exactly why it felt like mine. I had finally built a life where I didn't have to flinch, where I didn't have to negotiate my right to exist in peace, and best of all, I had chosen every part of it. Luis had said it weeks ago, and he had been right. I smiled differently now. Not the rehearsed smile for family events, not the stiff smile in professional headshots, but the kind that lived in my eyes, the kind I didn't have to practice. It had taken a long time to get here. A slap in a ballroom. A letter never meant to be read aloud. 200 witnesses and a lifetime of quiet resentment. But in the end, I wasn't angry about it anymore. Because it gave me the one thing I had always needed. Myself. If you've been through something like this, if you've stood alone in the middle of a room full of people who claimed to love you but didn't listen, I want you to know something. You don't have to earn your place. You don't have to give up your peace to be loved. And you never owe anyone the things you fought for, especially not the people who only show up to take. Not everyone who shares your blood deserves to share your future. And no one, not your parents, not your siblings, not even someone you once loved, has the right to make you smaller than you are. So if you've ever been a Camille, I hope this story helps you breathe a little deeper. And if you're still finding your way out, I hope you'll remember this. You're not too much. You're just finally not shrinking. And that's more than enough. If this story felt like yours, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or subscribe. You're not alone. And you never were.